All right. Hello, everybody. All you people of the multiverse. Welcome to the Dark Council podcast. Tis I, the Freelancer. Welcomed with my good friend Jake.
Oh, hello.
For our very spoopy Halloween segment.
Ooh.
So, in our last couple bits, we've been covering the legacy of Dathomir, and this happens to be part of it. But it does cover a lot more beyond its part in Dathomir. As a fact, Dathomir, from what I looked at, actually appears to be the end of this whole thing's story. What we are talking about today, for those who are uninitiated or unknown, we are talking about the Blackwing virus, otherwise known by its other names of Imperial Bioweapons Project I-71A, or the Sickness.
You gotta get down with it.
Don't think anybody wants to get down with this sickness. Get to reuse that joke.
I do.
We did that one. We used it used it off stream. Now we get to reuse it on stream.
Oh yeah.
So this is the story of the Death Troopers and all of that mess. Not those silly, tall, dark armored ones that Disney made up. No, we're talking about a much more nefarious, evil, monstrous one. This is Star Wars Zone Zombies, to put it in a very simple manner. And boy, does this have a storied legacy. So storied, in fact, that it actually takes place well before the events of even the Mandalorian Wars. We're looking at something that takes place around the age of 46-45 BBY. Roughly almost 650 years prior to the events of the Mandalorian Wars. But this is what we're going to be covering in our topic today. And boy, is there a lot of feet on this one. So, just to put it in perspective, I'm gonna be using a lot of this off the wiki. So there's where a lot of my source comes in for this, where a lot of my notes are gonna be played off of, because scheduling this week was a fucking mess. It was an absolute mess. And we are going to be using it because there was a lot more that was worth reflecting on from that than just making into a summarized set of notes. Or if we are to truly end on a scary note, this is the way we do it.
Ooh.
So,
I'm ready to have my pants scared off of me. Good thing I'm home alone right now.
ah, yes, you and your cats.
That's right.
You kooky bird cat owner. Kooky Birdman cat owner.
That's right. Harvey Birdman, attorney at law.
Alright.
Oh.
So, let's go ahead and start with some of the crazy biological information that is summarized on the wiki. So, how many races do you think actually are known to be susceptible to this thing? If you assumed all of them, you are correct.
Okay, good. I was about to say, is it every single one of them?
Would you also account for the fact that not only can sentient creatures receive this disease, but plants themselves can receive this disease.
Are you telling me that there is zombie wreck ghouls out there?
Zombie, probably. I don't think it does not list them, but it sure as shit lists zombie tauntauns.
Oh no!
So the ones that are listed as susceptible species are Bothans, Dathomirians, Dophonians, Deveronians, humans, Ithorians, Mon Calamari, the Murakami orchid, Nettie, Rancor, Rhodian, Suliston, Tauntaun, as previously mentioned, Trandoshan, Twi'lek, Whippet, Wookiees, and Zabrak. Those are all the listed susceptible species. It is highly likely that that list expands well beyond that.
That's crazy.
So the method of transmission comes in 3 different variations. You can contract this disease by way of a bite wound sustained from infected victims, as per standard zombie norms.
Yeah.
Transmission by contact with bodily fluids of the infected. And airborne contagions.
Airborne. That's not great. We are
all
all the Walking Dead.
I'll tell you why the airborne is actually the most dangerous way of getting it. Because there's no possible means of protection from the airborne strain.
Not great.
Because and I'll get into a lot of this later, but the incubation period of bite victims is probably the shortest, taking anywhere between seconds to minutes for those who sustain a wound via a bite from one of the infected.
Wait, how long?
Seconds to minutes.
Oh, that's quick as shit.
Yeah. However,
that's
the airborne strain and through fluid transmission could take up to several hours if you come into contact with it through fluid transmission or inhalation. It is up to several hours for that viral incubation period to really take effect. So here are the full list of symptoms in summarized form. Direct transmission only gives madness, followed shortly by complete loss of cognitive function. Airborne transmission has a wider note: coughing, mucus buildup, fever, hallucinations, gastrointestinal disturbances, profuse internal bleeding, cardiac arrest, seizure, and coma.
It's just a bad time.
And its general transmission is through its general transmission symptoms include necrosis of flesh and organ tissue, eventual death, and reanimation of death as an undead cannibal.
That's not great.
No. There are 3 known treatments to be able to curb or stop this disease. You can consume the still beating heart of a Jedi who registers a high metachlorian count.
Is that fucking like that? Okay, that sounds like a home remedy.
No.
Like, the best thing for the cold is chicken noodle soup and Sprite. And you're like, but is it though?
No. So there is a specific means for. I'll get into what that method contextually is, but to put it simply, that's its original intended cure. That's the originally intended cure. Turn my music.
Awful.
I turn my music down on my audio. This shit's fucking popping off. Everything's set. It's on 7 and it's still. This is weird. My media player's weird. This media player come up with some more fucking audio than my Spotify does. It's wild. So outside just outright eating a Jedi's heart. Your other two options are swift amputation of limbs that contain the site of transmission, and an antivirus injection. The latter is probably the first one is the most difficult to obtain. The second is actually the antivirus. You are better off cutting off your own limb if you get infected.
Jeez.
Now, there is a way to omit yourself from contamination through the airborne strain, and I'll get to that, but let's dive into the actual strange synthesis of this thing. Because this is where I really got into the idea that this thing is just fucked.
Okay.
So, the sickness, later known as Imperial Bioweapons Project I-71A, or the Blackwing virus.
Ratata.
Word. Was a disease that was synthesized through the use of alchemical techniques practiced by members of the Sith Order. The pathogen was not the goal of alchemical experimentation, but was instead created during attempts to concoct an elixir to achieve immortality. The mixture that generated the virus required several ingredients, the most crucial of which was the rare Murakami Black Orchid. The orchid was a fully self-aware and highly force-sensitive plant that could communicate telepathically with other force-sensitives and, when added to the other components of the immortality elixir, would create a potent and deadly viral infection. For synthesis to be successful, the mixture had to be enriched within a living being through the use of mechanical pumps and surgical tubing. The alchemist would create a circuit between the organic host and a fluid reservoir into which additional ingredients could be added. The final product was a yellowish red liquid that would run throughout the body of the organic host, through the tubes, and into a pump before being cycled back through into the body. When the fluid was completed and ready to be collected, the circuit could be broken in order for the viral fluid to be siphoned into the storage. Other methods of production and experimentation included the use of human lungs as a biological host in which the virus could be enriched and studied. When created for the purposes of immortality, the finalized mixture was to be ingested by the alchemist. Conversely, when the mixture was crafted specifically for the creation of the virus, a highly refined fluid version of the sickness could be collected from the living host and stored within airtight tanks. So, that is how the synthesis of this virus is procured.
Yo, they really just were like, yo, what if we make this virus catchable in every single fucking way possible?
Yeah.
Put that shit in, like, yeah, we're gonna incubate it in lungs. Oh, that makes it so it's gonna be really easy to catch through the air, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
Now, transmission of the disease. Imperial Bioweapons Project I-71A was an extremely persistent and audacious pathogen. The disease easily crossed species barriers and transmitted itself within a population quickly and in myriad ways. Humanoid species susceptible to the sickness included all the ones I mentioned before. I'm not running back through that list. You missed it. You can catch you can run back to see you can run back to see it on the VOD on YouTube. No, you can actually catch it there. The virus could also infect plant life, such as the sentient netty and the Murakami orchid itself. Additionally, non-sentient creatures, like the reptomammalian tauntaun and rancor, were susceptible to infection.
I don't like that rancor could get it. That's not great.
Even dead tissue could become infected, as was the case with the human Von Longo, who was killed 2 weeks prior to an outbreak. So even if you're already dead, you're not safe.
You're not safe here.
The transmission rate within a contained population was nearly 100% when excluding those naturally immune to the pathogen. Because the actual virus strain that the Empire makes as the Blackwing virus had already been developed several thousands of years later, and had already managed, and through the amount of people that exist now, had already managed to produce those with a natural inborn immunity. However, the immunity is only to the airborne strain. You are still very much susceptible if you are hit with the fluid contact or the actual bite itself. The immunity is only towards the airborne strain. The first individual to fall victim to the virus during an outbreak was always the organic host within the fluid circuit that synthesized the viral mixture. After that initial carrier fell victim to the disease, there were a number of ways by which the sickness could spread in a population. The most direct transmission method was a bite from an infected subject. Bite wounds would produce the most drastic symptoms and deposit the highest number of viral agents into a new victim. Hence why it only takes seconds to minutes for the bite to be the way it contracts.
Don't like.
Another way by which transmission can be achieved was through contact with the bodily fluids of the infected. The virus could be carried by saliva, blood, or a gelatinous coagulation of fluids that ran through the bodies of the victims.
I don't like the phrase of that.
Should have probably put a disclaimer at the start of this. This is gonna get gross.
I don't like the idea of coagulate inside the victims.
Well, keep that one in mind, because that one will come up later.
I don't want to keep it in mind.
Unfortunately,
I want to keep it far out of mind.
Unfortunately, it's stuck there, just like its victims.
How dare you?
If any of these liquids came in contact with the fluids of an uninfected subject, an open wound, or a mucous membrane, such as an eye, the sickness could enter the body and replicate.
So 48 days later type zombies.
Yeah.
I don't like those ones. Yeah. I like the Romero zombies, where they're slow and stupid.
Oh, these ones are way smarter than even fucking T-virus zombies.
Yeah, I don't like that.
A method of conveyance that was exclusive to the weaponized version of the virus was airborne transmission. When stored within airtight tanks, the virus could be released into an atmosphere by allowing for the tanks to be subjected to a leak. In its airborne strain, the virus could transcend all quarantine and contaminant efforts to reach new hosts and accumulate more victims. In this form, the disease could even infect individuals within biohazard gear or stormtrooper armor, both of which were specifically designed to prevent chemical or biological attacks.
No.
So if you come into contact with an airborne strain, and you don't have natural immunity,
die.
Rip.
Today.
You best hope you have some of that antivirus.
The worst part is if you contract, you can't even be like, oh man, you know what? I'm just gonna end it. I'm just gonna get rid of it. I'm just gonna kill myself. That doesn't work that way.
Nope. No, it does not.
Get back up and fight for the horde.
So, the overall symptom overview. The effects of the sickness on organic tissue were drastic and overwhelming. The disease worked quickly to destroy a body, but the severity of its symptoms varied greatly, depending on the method of transmission that resulted in infection and the species of the victim. The most direct form of transmission, a bite sustained from a victim, caused the swiftest bodily reaction. Immediately after the virus entered the subject's system, their skin would adopt a pale gray pallor and perspire profusely. The flesh around the transmission site would begin necrosis within minutes.
Oh.
And a gelatinous gray fluid would develop beneath the wound. The victim's vision would quickly become impaired and their breathing would be labored. Minutes after being bitten, the human Monrot began to suffer from all these symptoms, in addition to a shooting pain in his left arm and violent hallucinations of a skeletal black fist seizing his heart.
That's crazy! That's metal as fuck, dude.
Others experienced mental symptoms ranging from vividly reproduced emotional memories to visions of a mouth opening from within their torso. Some, like Rot and Rance Lusk, found the final moments of life to be a relieving and empowering experience. No normal psycho shit.
Yeah.
The Nettie species experienced a longer-term incubation period when infected via a bite wound. As the virus spread through their body, the bark that served as their skin would turn a dark brown or black and begin to molt. Their branch limbs would atrophy and clump together, and the victim would emit a musty odor that later intensified into a boggy, diseased stench. As the bark molded, it would expose open sores and reveal the pulpy heartwood within the body, from which sap and other bodily fluids leaked. When a whippet was infected via bodily fluid contact, the site of transmission suffered from heavy swelling and necrosis. Sores would open and seep blood in thick discharge, and their tusks would turn a sickly yellow. All fluid and bite transmission victims, regardless of species, were eventually driven mad by the sickness's progression into their brain, resulting in a loss of self-awareness and bodily control. This led the infected into fits of homicidal rage before the virus ultimately shut down their body. The symptoms experienced by those who contracted the virus through airborne contagion were drawn out over a longer period than those experienced by bite victims. When the virus activated within a subject, they would immediately suffer from a light cough and draining sinuses. The respiratory difficulties would gradually worsen, leading to labored breathing and deep rattling sounds of mucus buildup in the lungs. Man, doesn't that sound like COVID, everyone?
Yeah, except COVID doesn't, well, I mean, it depends.
Gosh. Gosh. Those strains are still developing, you know.
True. What if they were to intermingle with the side effects of bath salts? Like that one dude who ate that guy's face.
The patient would quickly experience gastrointestinal abnormalities, including vomiting and nausea. The skin would turn a pale green or gray and would break into heavy perspiration, similar to a bite victim. Unlike bite victims, these symptoms continually worsened over the course of several hours and included conditions like fever and internal bleeding. Vomiting, blood, seizures, respiratory arrest, and cardiac arrest soon followed, as was general lethargy and pain. Other patients from internal and external hemorrhaging, and even comatose were possible. Those who avoided comatose usually fell into a state of delirium, experiencing vivid hallucinations that ultimately led to aggressive madness. This would cause the victims to turn on one another or commit suicide. Others died from their seizures, cardiac arrest, or blood loss. The airborne virus interacted differently with the physiology of the Wookiee species.
Oh no.
You remember what I said about keep that fluid in mind?
Ugh.
Wookiees who had become infected suffered from a swelling of the tongue that restricted their airways. A thick gray fluid collected in their throats, eventually causing them to rupture and expose the musculature within. Prior to death, Wookiees were susceptible to horrific hallucinations. The smuggler Chewbacca saw visions of his family and of dead Wookiee younglings during a Life Day celebration.
Oh, hey, Life Day. I can feel your face on the other side.
These are the moments that I wish I had a fucking face cam out.
I can feel it the second I said it. I could feel it. I'm so tired of this shit. Yeah!
As the sickness progressed through their body, the Wookiees would become violent and emit a feral stench, similar to the effects of an activated aggression gland. Rhodians also had a unique reaction. The virus caused violent vomiting that expelled their own organs through their mouths.
Blech.
Due to a biological predisposition, Sulistans were particularly susceptible to Imperial Bioweapons Project I-71A. As the virus took hold of their anatomy, infected Sulistans displayed severe mood swings, cold sweats, and whitened eyes. All of these unique symptoms ultimately culminated in death for all these species. Post-mortem. Regardless of the transmission method, all who were infected by the virus eventually died. Immediately after their death, their bodies would decay abnormally quickly, emitting a foul odor of death and rot. At this point, each body went through a transformation. The collective consciousness that governed the virus directed its agents to take control of the corpse's nerve receptors and reanimate the flesh by compelling the musculature to fire. The bodies of the dead rose once more, this time as undead monstrosities. These newly reborn victims had no will of their own, and existed only to eat, kill, or transform any survivors of the initial plague. In bite victims, the transformation happened almost immediately after death, or, in some cases, as the victim died. Victims of the airborne contagion, however, the dead did not rise once more until the virus had killed a sufficient number of the living. For Force sensitives, the transmission was accelerated and intensified through the dark side. There were several key characteristics that were symptomatic of a patient's resurrection. The undead typically suffered from heavy flesh and muscular decay, and therefore had difficulty walking. They instead shuffled about slowly until they were met with potential prey, in which case they entered a staggering half-run. In their search for food, the infected victims often inflicted bodily harm upon themselves. Many chewed through their own lips, while others broke their own jaws in the act of unhinging them to eat. These oral wounds, in addition to other facial decay, often caused the dead to display a perpetually sinister grin that stretched from ear to ear. Other common conditions included lazy, dead eyes, sagging skin, and an aggressive, hungered appearance. They tended to salivate heavily and made shallow, rasping noises that were akin to attempts to breathe or speak, or at speech. Being a member of the undead granted the victim's body certain abilities that would not have been available prior to death. The infected could endure physically damaging and debilitating accidents and injuries with little difficulty, such as 100-meter free falls, decapitations, shootings, beatings, and stabbings.
Jesus.
The resurrected could accumulate gastric juices and pulpy partially digested matter within their bellies and regurgitated the fluid to build barriers and obstacles, similar to the nesting techniques of cosm wasps. Among the characteristics that were essential to the groupthink of the undead was the ability to communicate via oscillating screams. These screams were of a pitch and wavelength that only the resurrected could accomplish or understand.
Oh, so they had their own horrifying language.
Yes, and it was all screams.
Yes, and it's just screaming all the way down.
It's just screaming. The diagnosis. There were several ways by which one could diagnose a patient with the sickness, although traditional contamination diagnostics were unable to detect the airborne contagion within a select atmosphere. The disease was easily detectable once it entered the body. Blood analysis and cultures could detect a virus within an individual's anatomy, although this tended to not be necessary once symptoms arose. The pervasive quality of the disease allowed for physicians and onlookers to assume that anyone who exhibited symptoms of poor health within an outbreak area was infected by Imperial Bioweapons Project I-71A. If no symptoms were readily observable and appropriate medical equipment was not available, infection could be inferred based upon whether or not a subject had come in contact with infected transmission material. Self-diagnosis was possible for those who began to experience mental abnormalities, such as hallucinations or contact with the virus's collective consciousness. At least one HK series assassin droid was able to detect any organisms that were infected by the sickness within a given vicinity. Another +1 for the HKs.
HKs keep on winning.
HKs out here scoring them +2s. Viral behavior and characteristics of the disease. As noted by its creators, the virus had a level of self-awareness and deliberation that was uncommon among pathogenic diseases. This sentience originated from the addition of the Murakami orchid, but existed as an entirely separate entity from that of the individual orchid that was added to the viral mixture. The mind that governed the individual viruses had drives and motives of its own, and worked outside the will of the alchemist that created it. Upon entering an organism, the individual viral agents remained benign, but replicated within the cells of the host so as to bolster their numbers and strength. By using quorum sensing, the viral particles could tell when their numbers had reached a point at which the host organism would be unable to combat them with their own immune system. When this threshold was reached, the disease particles would activate to full virulence and attack the body of its carrier. This behavior affected the victims on more than a microbiological level alone. When the sickness was introduced to a new population, the infection would kill off and replicate within all carriers until only those who were immune to or vaccinated against the disease were left. Using the same quorum sensing techniques, the sickness would then reanimate the diseased host and use their overwhelming numbers to hunt down and kill the survivors of the initial plague. To coordinate the actions of different groups of undead, the infection would cause its puppet victims to emit rhythmic waveform screams. These screams alerted the various groups of undead to the locations of others and served as a system of communication through call and response screaming.
Why are they always screaming?
The disease also possessed the extraordinary ability to learn and develop new skills based on the experiences of its first infected victims. Although newly transformed populations of undead began their existence as primitive stalkers, they quickly learned to avoid danger and to utilize machines and technology. Because of the collective sentience that governed each of the victims, they even moved as if they were a single living organism, reacting and adapting to the environment around it. Depending on the situation, the undead could equip themselves with weapons ranging from blasters to lightsabers and even starfighters. One group of the infected even arranged a communications blackout and activated and operated a tractor beam in order to prevent survivors from leaving their immediate vicinity and to trap any unwary passerby. their rate of behavioral adaptation was extremely swift and happened simultaneously throughout a cluster of cooperating undead. The sickness's drive and will to kill and devour any living creatures was the only motivation within the mind that governed the viral particles, and so it drove it to attempt to purposefully spread the infection to new populations. The consciousness of the disease also spoke directly to the infected prior to their death, sometimes mimicking the presence of the force or even reasoning with its victim.
Oh.
Yeah. Imagine being told by the thing that's trying to slowly fucking kill you that it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be fine. You'll get to wake up again and feel better than you ever were before.
Horrifying.
Yes. When the sickness infected the Nettie Sith librarian Dylis, the sickness spoke to him and proclaimed that everything in the galaxy was mere fuel and meat for its spread. The infected Dylis accepted the sickness's words as counsel, becoming one with the beast, as the sickness called itself. He was convinced that even his beloved collection of books was mere fuel.
Oh my god. The virus calls itself the beast?
It was calling itself the beast to Dylis.
That's crazy. What are we living in? Homeworld Cataclysm? Sorry.
The Sith acolyte Rance Lusk at first willingly accepted the sickness to become immortal, only to discover it would take away his individuality and claim his very soul. While the sickness claimed it would allow Lusk to endure, unlike the others, he still refused, only for him to lose all choice in the matter as the sickness claimed him as one of its zombies.
Crazy how it claims your soul, too. That's wild. Doesn't just make you a zombie. It also makes it so you can't go to the other side.
When the virus finally activated itself within an infected organism, it congealed various bodily fluids into a gray, oozing substance that was capable of independent locomotion.
Oh, shit, fuck off. It's also gray goo? Jesus Christ.
This ooze carried the sickness throughout the body and had emitted viral agents into the atmosphere when exposed to open air. Upon coming into contact with living flesh, the fluid coagulated and crawled over the skin in search of an opening or wound by which to enter the body. Many of these characteristics, particularly the collective consciousness, the physical appearance of the gray fluid, and the post-mortem symptoms of the infected, mirrored the effects and physical manifestations of the Mengal, a dangerous entity native to the galaxy's unknown regions. Another probably gonna be one of those very later topics we'll probably end up discussing in the future. It's probably gonna be next year. Talking about
Fair.
creepy creatures of Star Wars.
Like the dinosaurs?
Which ones?
The Force dinosaurs?
Oh, the Sea Ruby?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. The concentrated airborne version of the sickness possessed a peculiar limitation. While it had the ability to infect a large population over a short period of time, that population had to have constant exposure to an atmosphere contaminated with Imperial Bioweapons Project I-71A. If the undead separated themselves from such an atmosphere, or distanced themselves from a readily available source of viral agents, the decay process would stabilize and muscle receptors would cease to fire, essentially terminating the facilities of the undead.
I mean, that's good, I guess.
So here's the methods of treatment and prevention. The Blackwing virus was capable of overcoming nearly every traditional method of treatment or containment, making it incredibly difficult to prevent or cure. Because the airborne strain could penetrate biohazard gear and containment bubbles, quarantine efforts were a vain exercise. Despite its strengths, the disease could be blocked or fought in several ways. Some humans possessed a natural immunity to the disease due to genetic predisposition. However, this protection only worked, as stated before, against the airborne infection. Contact with bite fluids and the other stuff.
Oh.
Contact with contact made via the bite wounds and the fluids was still the same result. So, natural predisposition helped you only against the airborne. You got bit, you better hope you are willing to fucking lose that limb.
Oof.
Or you have an antivirus on hand. Usually both. Because especially when it was the Blackwing virus, you are very much not going to get access to you're not going to get access to the part of a Jedi.
Yeah.
Which I will get to that one. We'll definitely talk about why that is. After blood analysis of these immune individuals, the specific gene that allowed for this protection could be synthesized and replicated in order to create an antivirus that could slow the infection or prevent it altogether. Injected intravenously, the antivirus worked well with human physiology, but induced infection symptoms in Wookiees. Yeah, that's a thing.
I don't like that Wookiees get infected. That's terrifying to me.
It's even worse how they get infected. Like, what happens to them when they actually get infected is actually one of the more fucked up ones. Soliston's actually got it pretty tame, if I'm being honest. Fucking Rhodians out here quite literally vomiting out their insides.
Yeah, it's not great.
Wookiees fucking choked out and then having the buildup of fucking mucus blow their innards open. Fucking balloon popping to fucking open up their fucking body. It's fucked up.
It's not great.
Remember when I said this was gonna be Remember I said this was just gonna be a talk about zombies and that this was gonna be like...
Yeah, lighthearted conversation about zombies.
No. This is not the direction this is going at all.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, nor was it ever.
Awful.
The antivirus could be used on the undead, but had little effect. While some measure of mental and bodily control returned to the victim for a short time, they were quickly reclaimed by the sickness and once more turned into a cannibalistic monstrosity. So, upon death, upon that state of reanimation, they are beyond saving. So how does one prevent this outbreak, you might ask? To prevent the disease, prevent the spread of the disease once an outbreak had begun, an individual had several limited options. Wookiees could be saved by removing the infectious fluid buildup from their throats with a syringe. So you can't save the Wookiee.
That's pretty good.
A patient could also be saved by amputating the limb or body part that hosted the site of transmission.
But you only have like fucking seconds to do this shit.
It's for the bite, you have seconds.
Oh, okay.
Seconds to minutes, it varies. But
still,
yeah, no, you want to be like, if you get bit, you want to be like instant. That shit's gone.
Yep.
Like vibro knife at the ready. Bye-bye arm.
Bye-bye.
If the infected gray matter began to move through the body before amputation could be performed, a physician could make an incision into the patient's body and insert their fingers in order to squeeze and pop the gelatinous substance that carried the virus.
Ugh.
Yeah, this is
Ugh, I don't like that at all.
Yeah, this gets gross. This shit gets gross. If the substance was halted, the areas of the body that had already been infected would fall to necrosis, while the rest of the being survived. So, it's Star Wars. Get yourself a cool cybernetic prosthetic.
True.
Wanna know how I got this?
I know how I got these scars.
Even worse because the
zombie war.
Fucked up. Death could also be delayed by flushing the transmission site with a saline solution and attaching an intravenous pump and performing regular blood transfusions. This removed infected blood from the body and pumped in new, uninfected fluids. Although the transfusion method was effective, it only slowed the progression of the disease. Eventually, the virus would take hold of the fresh blood as well, slowly turning the patient into a member of the undead. To destroy the hordes of the undead, only certain methods prove successful. Before I even get into a remote note of these, how many off the top of your head do you think would work? Based on the logic and assets that Star Wars has available, what do you think some of the assets are ways that work here? Because we already know blasters don't work, decapitation doesn't work, stabbing and beating the infected does not work. So what's the...
Total immolation, like flamethrowers.
That's one.
Okay. I'm assuming vacuum of space does nothing.
Would actually stop the spread because, like it said before, it needs a vacuum. It needs an atmosphere in order to spread. Without an atmosphere, it just becomes dormant and will die off.
Okay, so vacuum of space would work.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can utilize a vacuum because I'll actually get to that later, but
blasters don't work. What about disintegration rifles?
yes.
Okay.
Complete methods of burning work effectively.
Gotcha. I think that's about it.
Well, here, let me add a few more.
Okay.
You can grind up the bodies of the infected.
Oh, fuck, no!
However, it leaves some of the remains to still spread the infection. Chopping it up with a lightsaber works.
Well, that's just burns again.
Yeah. Crushing it underneath a heavy object also destroys the zombies. Like, completely.
So would force crush work?
Yes, as would
just
force
turn them into a little
lightning,
meat cube?
As would force lightning.
Well, force lightning just burns again.
Does not change the fact it works.
We're back to burns.
Immolation is the best method, okay? Because even exploding works. Explosions.
Okay, explosions is actually just burns and force, like actual physical force.
While decapitating the victim does not work, destroying its cranium, destroying the brain while it is still attached actually does. So braining a zombie does work.
Dope.
Also, with most living beings, complete vaporization, as stated, works. There's also a way that works. So, remember how we talked about the home remedies idea?
Yeah.
The Murakami orchid, which is used in the actual viral mixture itself, actually works as a way of reversing it. And by reversing it, I mean it creates a whole new strain of infected that seek out to attack and kill any of the established infected. So it's throwing zombies at zombies.
Wouldn't that just... Hold on.
Well, it doesn't... it doesn't spread the infection as it doesn't spread the infection like the actual sickness will, but it will leave any survivors that it will still so the way it's described here. So a force-sensitive individual that made contact with the consciousness of the Murakami orchid that was used to create the viral mixture could, on occasion, urge the orchid to grow within the bodies of the undead. If the orchid agreed, it could force the spores within the gray viral fluid to germinate and push their way out of the body. Although this stopped the body of the uninfected individual, the newly grown Murakami orchids were controlled by the sickness and so sought to attack and kill any survivors in the vicinity.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by home remedies. It actually doesn't work.
Yeah. That's
However,
crazy.
Now we actually touch on what this whole thing's original purpose was. Because the final method of treatment for the Sith alchemists who created the virus in hopes of finding a path to immortality, their goal could be achieved only by completing a dark ritual within the Sith temple. This ritual required that the alchemists first infect themselves with the virus, then capture a member of the Jedi Order who registered a high midichlorian count. The virus ensured that the Sith's body would live on beyond death, but the process of decay killed the alchemist, leaving the corpse to be controlled by the sickness. Using a Sith sword to cut out and devour the still beating heart of the midichlorian-rich Jedi, the Sith could retain the death-defying qualities granted by the Blackwing virus, but prevent the dissolution of their bodily tissue, thereby gaining ultimate immortality. That is where this whole thing stems from.
That's crazy. They fucking Vegeta'd themselves into fucking the worst possible outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the whole rundown of this absolutely fucked up virus. That's the actual, like, rundown of everything about this whole virus itself. Because, look, before we get on to the actual history, I want to preface, like, I looked into this. I read over this last night. I'm like, all right, well, this has left a newfound mental scar. I'm gonna go purge my brain for like an hour before I go to sleep. Because it wasn't until almost like 3 o'clock my time. It wasn't until like 3 o'clock my. Actually, no, it was 3:40. I spent like 40 minutes reading over the page for this. Just sitting here reading over the entire page, trying to like look over and be like, am I gonna be able to like actually note take this, or is this just gonna be like this feels like I just need to like spoof read off the wiki, because Jesus, people.
Yeah, it's not great.
You know, people say they want to see Star Wars do something new and different.
Do they though?
I mean, they do, actually.
I mean, yeah, but like...
Because that's kind of what Star Wars is all about. Like, Star Wars is all about innovating off what it had before.
I want...
I mean, that's... When you look at it from the original trilogy to prequels, you saw a lot more, like, cool ship designs. You got to see a lot of, like, new and expansive places. You were looking at a different level of technology than what you were in... Looking at a different level and different kind of technology base than what you were during the original trilogy.
Yeah, isn't there, I could have sworn I saw gameplay. They were making I'm pretty sure it was fan-made.
Yeah,
but it was a Star Wars, like, horde survival, where you are a stormtrooper on an infected Star Destroyer.
Yeah, it's a fan game.
Oh, dude, Disney's got no balls. Make that game real. Disney, hire that guy. Because that would be the dopest shit. I want Star Wars horror games. I want Star Wars horror movies. That would be so cool. There's so much cool, spooky shit in Star Wars.
And a lot of it can be played around the unknown regions. I mean, we got our closest thing to actual Death Troopers in the in the season finale for Ahsoka. A little bit of a note there. That's actually something that the Night Sisters have the capability of doing. They have the magic that they have the ability to use their magic to actually resurrect the dead and possess them through their own magic.
Yeah, but I forgot where I was going. Shit.
Yeah, you were going on a train about Disney taking zero initiative, which is what they do anyway.
Yep. No, fuck. There's something else I was going to mention, and it's gone from my brain now. Forever lost.
Don't worry, you'll probably remember it in the middle of this.
Probably.
But, yeah, no, like, this is definitely...
Oh, I remember it right now. Boom. Got it. Star Weirds. You could make a really cool horror movie about a ship stuck, like, traveling through hyperspace and having to deal with Star Weird. That'd be so dope.
Mm.
That's such a good premise for a horror movie. Space ghosts? Coast to coast? Let's go!
You hit the Harvey Birdman and the Space Ghost fucking thing. We're almost on the... We almost have it.
That's right. I just gotta find a way to naturally bring up the Brack show, and we're done.
We need the Brack show. We need the Brack show. We need Aqua Teen, and we need let's see, Frisky Dingo.
Yep. Oh, dude, Frisky Dingo's weird.
That's a fucking weird trip.
I look at Frisky Dingo and I go, I see. Archer before Archer. Got it.
Yeah. That's
And Archer's dope.
Archer is pretty good. I haven't watched Archer in a long while, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's been a minute.
Yeah.
Because I think I dropped off, like, the 6th season?
Something. I don't remember the last one I was watching. I dropped off
when they started going on the whole... When they went from, like, going official government... From their special government agent to their special secret agent service to actually being part of the FBI for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then later they went in doing a whole, like, they were, like, gun runners and drug dealers and stuff. Like, trying to make, like, a criminal family or whatever.
You know, as you do.
Because they basically got defunct by the CIA or whatever after the season 5 finale. I think I was watching like halfway. I think I got maybe like 3 or 4 episodes in the season 6, and that was where my brain ended up just decaying after that. Like, I think I got into other stuff, and other stuff started popping off, or the overabsorption of everything with Archer kind of just...
Yup. There's a lot going on.
Archer's on like season 9 now.
Something crazy.
Like, they're pushing the envelope on this series like they did with Supernatural, and it's wild.
Considering it's a little, like, considering it's a cartoon, yeah, that's insane.
You know, it's got, like, it has, like, over 10 seasons now, I think. I'd have to double check it after this, but it's fucking insane. So... Now that we've had our mental bleach, let's return to fucking drowning it with horrible zombie virus bullshit.
I mean, do we have to, though?
At the very least, to cover the history of this thing. Because that's all we've got left is the history of it. I'm not even going to bother looking at its canon fucking iteration, because I guarantee you it's just going to be like, oh, this was all just the Red Harvest novel. There's no... And Palpatine made the Death Troopers... He named the Death Troopers after a failed weapons experiment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no. I'm not even going to bother with canon's iteration because they couldn't bother to make it worthwhile.
Canon makes me sad, dude.
Get it right, mouse. Get it right. Not that hard. Fucking George Lucas could make it. Anybody could.
All I'm hearing is George Lucas, that hack.
I mean, for selling it out to Disney, yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Worst decision that man ever made. I've been putting up with a lot of the mouse's shit, but as of late, I've started to really sour on my opinions for them. Like, I've put up with a lot of their stuff and found enjoyment for a lot of it, but they've got to start pushing the envelope again, or we're gonna have problems. Especially with how much shit has been getting announced. It's being delayed, nothing's taking off, etc., etc. Ah.
Yep.
Sets me. But yeah, we gotta get through the history because I'm gonna have, because after this and after we wrap up here, I'm gonna have to go pick up my dad because he's got his tires he's got to go get new pads on his tires, so he's gonna need me to come pick him up.
Yep.
So let's blitz through the history because we've touched on most of it, but we're gonna actually. So this is where we actually get into the individual stories. This is where we're gonna actually get to talk a bit about Red Harvest, the actual origin story for this whole virus, the events of the Death Trooper novel, where this whole thing made its first appearance as a piece of media for Star Wars, and the Galaxy's Adventure for the MMO, which takes place on Dathomir.
Who would have thought?
We come full circle, people. Eventually we were gonna get there. So this is how this whole thing came to be. Origins of this whole thing started in 4645 BBY through the efforts of the Sith Lord known as Darth Dreer, who established an academy for students of the dark side on the frozen world of Odasser Faustin, in the Outer Rim's Estrin sector. Dreer built the academy ostensibly to train acolytes to serve the reborn Sith Empire, but had ulterior motives. He would compel his students to build an extensive library, and Dreer went about perfecting a hidden Sith temple beneath the Athenaeum. From within the depths of this temple, he experimented on a number of specimens in the search of one thing: immortality.
As Sith do.
Palpatine's entire story in canon. We took a man who actually had some depth and level to him in Legends, and then we made him, oh, I'm evil, 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 cartoonish evil, immortality evil.
Yup. Somehow he returned.
I mean, he returned in Legends too.
Yup. Somehow.
More times than he did in fucking canon, unfortunately.
Yep. Somehow. Here's the thing, though. In Legends, they at least explain it. They don't just throw out the word, somehow he returned. Fuck you mean?
What's bad is, only the novelization actually elaborates on his return. And it's the exact same way in freaking Legends.
Yep.
We're gonna cover that. I'm making this, I'm making this the actual, like, declaration now. When the... We got what? When is it? Fuck. Shit. Where's my fucking... On the 21st of December. I will mark this down ahead of time for everybody. We will cover...
Life Day.
Shut up. That's next year.
You're gonna put it off next year too. You don't want to do Life Day.
I don't want that. I don't want to do it. I'll be a little proud about that. I don't want to do it.
No wanna.
On the 21st of December 2024, we will do a comparison to not only give the ending of the sequels their just dues, because around that time the 5-year anniversary of Rise of Skywalker will happen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 5 years already, gross.
5 years since the end of the sequels.
I don't like that so much.
Where we will compare the two worst parts of both continuities. Dark Empire versus the sequels. We'll stack which one is actually worse.
I mean, opinions will be made.
Opinions will be made, but we are having to go objectively on this. And hell, I may.
Do we have to be objective?
I may get to bring a special guest in for that one. I may make it a special occasion. We'll get a special guest in for it. I don't know.
Who knows?
Make it a fucking surprise, because it's so full. It's still got like 2 months before we even get there, so anything could happen. But yeah, no. Immortality was Dreer's goal, and he would come to formulate the complex elixir that could hypothetically grant eternal life. Given that the Seeker completed a precise series of rituals, he recorded all his findings within a Sith holocron and would go on to start creating said elixir through the powers of Sith alchemy. Using the Murakami Black Orchid as the active ingredient, Dreer ultimately succeeded and ingested the final product. While the mixture he consumed was complete, and therefore allowed his body to live on beyond the normal confines of death, it carried with it a single flaw. A viral disease that would ultimately attack and shut down its host brain, leaving the decaying body to exist as an empty shell of undead tissue.
Icky.
To avoid such fate, Dreer planned to complete a ritual he had devised to halt the sickness's progression. This ritual required that, at a specific point, shortly before the disease kill him, the Sith Lord would use a ceremonial Sith sword to cut out the living heart of a midichlorian-rich Jedi. Upon removing the still beating heart from the body, Dreer was to devour it so as to imbue himself with the Force-strong blood and thereby live forever. The sword itself was of a special commission to be forged for the occasion, and he had sent his sentries to a nearby world to capture his Jedi sacrifice. His pawns ultimately failed to return with a Jedi that had an acceptable midichlorian count, and so the sickness eventually claimed Dreer's life. Despite the Sith's failure, records of his attempts survived within his holocron that was hidden deep within the temple for over 1,000 years. Now we get to the current events of what occurs during the Red Harvest novel. Dreer's Academy had survived well past his death, and continued as a training institution for aspiring Sith through the Empire's Great Galactic War against the Old Republic and years beyond. During the period of political unrest that followed, a Sith Lord known as Darth Scariest served as the Academy's headmaster, overseeing a student body of several hundred, as well as a full staff of Sith Masters. During his tenure, Scariest journeyed deep into the library's ancient labyrinths and discovered Dreer's secret temple. Within, the Sith rediscovered his predecessor's holocron and claimed it for himself. This was witnessed by the elderly Nettie Sith librarian Dylas. But the onlooker made no move to procure the artifact for himself. Eager to unlock the secrets within, Scariest thoroughly studied the holocron's historical and alchemical contents and committed to recreating the immortality elixir so that he might reap its benefits. To that end, the Sith Lord began to abduct students from the school and hold them within his tower that sat squarely in the center of the Academy grounds. Within his laboratory at the highest level, Scabrous performed torturous experiments on the young Sith in his attempts to achieve immortality. Set to work creating the fluid that carried the virus, but lacked a key component, the orchid. Knowing that the ritual would not work without this vital ingredient, the Sith Lord set out to retrieve the plant through the employment of bounty hunters. Multiple hunters, including the human Dranok and his Nelvanian companion, Scarl, attempted to collect the bounty, but they all failed to bring Scabrous the genuine item. So, you know what? So, I remember this one from when I actually listened to the audiobook for Red Harvest.
Right.
So, you want to know what happened to those two that were mentioned? Scarl and Dranok?
Mm-hmm.
So, because they failed to actually bring him the orchid, when they were brought before Scabrous, he did not speak to them at all. The entire exchange, when they were brought to his chamber, his companion was ordered to wait outside while Dranok was allowed to speak with Scabrous. They were then brought a whole banquet for them to partake in and discuss over the meal, the happenings of the job. When the large dish was unveiled, on the dish was the flayed head of Scarl, his Nelvanian companion.
Oh.
And Dranok was then made, I believe, to have become one of the suscepted victims of Scabrous' experiments.
That sucks.
Yeah, it was... That was one of the more... Red Harvest, like the Death Trooper novel, is a very fucked series of events.
Yeah.
And at least Death Troopers, you get the build-up over the first 10 chapters. You don't just start with, like, chapter 1. You've got the Acolytes openly torturing each other. Like, a full scene being described of one of the Acolytes. I think it's actually the main character of the book. Being, like, bound and gagged in his bunk and stripped and beaten.
Oh my god.
It's fucked, dude. Red Harvest is fucked for completely different reasons that the Death Trooper novel is. Death Trooper is actually like zombie horror. Red Harvest goes above and beyond, dude.
That's fucking insane.
Completely shifts your view of what Star Wars can be if it were a whole different genre. If it played into other genres like horror, you get a whole different existence, dude. It's wild. Like, it becomes an entirely different vibe from what normal Star Wars stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even in the same vein like Star Wars trying to play into other ideas, like even what the Acolyte did, where it tried to be this fucking intrigue, mystery story. And in the case of, like, Book of Boba Fett or Mandalorian, trying to push away from the Jedi focus and actually giving, like, a focus to a whole separate group of cultures and Tatooine.
Yeah.
But when Star Wars goes into horror,
Fucking goes, dude.
they don't... They take that, and they don't go in a fucking sprint. They go to light speed with that shit.
Yeah, that shit fucking goes.
So I wanted to bring that one up. So, yeah, the two of them were killed in very horrific ways. And while he waited for one of his mercenary pawns to bring him the orchid, Scabrous moved forward with experimentation on his students. The subject of his focus in 3645 BBY was the acolyte Wim Nictor, who had been defeated in a training duel with a classmate and was promptly abducted by Scariest, who recognized his weakness in combat. While the boy was unconscious and recovering from his defeat, the Sith Lord placed him within a cage in his lab and surgically inserted 6 large tubes into his vertebrae.
Yeah.
Intending to use Nictor as the organic host in which the viral elixir could be synthesized. As Nictor was being driven insane by Scariest experiments, one of the Sith Lord's hired bounty hunters found success in his search on the core world of Marfa. Within a greenhouse maintained by the Jedi Order's agricultural corps, the whipped bounty hunter Tolk discovered the Murakami orchid. However, during his attempts to remove the plant from its hothouse, the whippet discovered that it was reliant on the forced presence of agricultural crops member Hestizo Trace, a characteristic Scariest had omitted from his descriptions of the orchid to bounty hunters in an attempt to ensure the legitimacy of the specimens brought to him. In an effort to guarantee the plant's survival during the journey to Odasser Faustin, Tolk kidnapped Trace and took her to the Sith Academy world as well. Upon arrival, Trace and the orchid were taken to Scariest's tower and handed over to the Sith Lord, who promptly added the plant to the mixture, being pumped through Nictor's broken body. With this addition, the disease activated to full virulence within the acolyte, driving him to commit suicide before reanimating his body.
Oof. Oof. What a way to go.
Yeah, it's not great. There's worse ways that people are going to suffer through this, but we're not there yet.
Yet.
Upon reanimation, Nictor's body broke free from its cage and tore the surgical tubes from its back in an attempt to attack Scariest. Failing to predict such an attack, the Sith Lord suffers a serious facial wound when the newly born creature bit into a large portion of his flesh. Jura Ostrogoth, a Sith student who had sneaked into the tower to investigate Scariest's activities, was caught in the melee between the Sith Lord and his creation and was inadvertently thrown out of the lab when Scariest force-pushed the Nictor creature out of one of the room's viewports. The students landed 100 meters below and were crushed by the impact. After noting that Hestizo Trace had escaped the tower in the commotion, Scariest treated his wound in an effort to stave off the disease's progression through his body, fitting himself with a portable hemodialysis pump and monitoring his contamination levels. Understanding the transfusion would only grant him a 6-hour reprieve from transformation into the undead. Scariest went to work hunting down Trace so that he might use her to complete Dreer's ritual. Meanwhile, Nictor's decimated body reawoke on the ground below and quickly began to eat what remained of Jura Ostrogoth, thereby infecting his corpse with the sickness. Fellow student Mana Rat witnessed their fall and Richter's reanimation, but escaped the undead acolyte after pinning his body beneath a large pile of stones in the shadow of the tower. Ostrogoth was born again as a member of the undead, staggering off towards the dormitories to find more victims. Within, he encountered and bit the Zabrak Scopicu? That's a name.
Scabajab?
Scorpio. I don't care.
What the fuck his name is?
Doesn't matter. He's infected. Afterwards, he also infected 6 more Sith students. Academy's masters, who sensed the sickness and its disturbing impact through the Force, called all of the students to a large convocation to inform them that lessons were canceled until the cause of the disturbance could be identified. Until then, all acolytes were ordered back to their dorms or to the dining hall for their evening meal. 120 of the students went to the hall to eat. They went to the hall to eat, and within, they were ambushed by the 6 acolytes who were transformed by Scorpio. All of the students were killed, only to be reanimated as zombies until under the will of the sickness. That's how that would normally go, I figure. Try to organize everybody in a convenient single location, and they all just fucking die.
Yeah.
Because you packed a horde of fucking... You packed the cattle essentially in with the wolf. You pack the cattle in with the wolves, it's gonna fucking turn out bad.
Yep, every time.
The undead gradually took over the academy, killing a number of masters and systematically working their way to infecting any survivors. Rot and 3 other students were able to survive for a time, but eventually turned on each other and were killed alongside their blade master, Zat Rakin. Trace also survived the initial plague with the assistance of the whipped Tolk, who elected not to leave the planet after finding him Nictor's undead body. Trace and Tolk traveled around the academy together for a time, defeating the undead and discovering new ways to kill or trick the zombies. The young Jedi eventually discovered that she could communicate with the orchid that had been used to create the virus and could motivate it to grow within the bodies of the undead, thereby destroying the zombie. As she capitalized on this connection, Scariest continued to search for her. Sith Lord returned to the Academy library, wherein he confronted the librarian Dylis and demanded that he assume the telepathic identity of the orchid and asked that Trace come into the library. Dylis complied, but before Scariest left into his work, the Sith Lord bit the Nettie, spreading the infection to him. Trace ultimately entered the library, where she was confronted and captured by Scariest and several undead specimens of the orchid. Meanwhile, Trace's brother and fellow Jedi, Rojo? I'm gonna assume Rojo.
Rojo, like red?
It's R-O-J-O, so I'm assuming
that would be Rojo, but it's Star Wars, so who the fuck knows?
Oh. Well, they're searching the academy for his abducted sister after escaping the now insane Dylis. Rojo journeyed into the hidden Sith temple, wherein he found Scariest about to use Dreer's sword to cut out his sister's heart. He jumped into the fray to defend his sister, but was ultimately killed. Despite his victory over the Jedi Knight, Scariest had nearly reached the limits of his body's resistance and succumbed to the disease. Trace was also nearly killed by the reborn Scariest creature, but instead encouraged the Murakami orchid to grow within his body as well, thus destroying the Sith Lord once and for all. Trace was then rescued from the planet by Tolk, who was working alongside Scariest's reprogrammed assassin droid and an academy mechanic named Purgus Fraud. During their flight from the planet, the droid was lost to laser cannon fire, and Tolk contracted and died from the sickness.
Uratat, uratatat.
Leaving Hestio Trace and Purgus Fraud as the only 2 survivors of the outbreak on Odasser Faustin. The undead creatures created by this disease were left behind on the world, while Trace returned to the Jedi Order to report on the incident. Despite the apparent isolation of the Odasser Faustin Academy and the monsters within, Trace still feared that the sickness would find a way to spread yet again. And over 3,000 years later, her fears come to fruition. So, this is where we transition from Red Harvest to Death Troopers. So, I want you to guess real quick.
Okay.
In the Empire,
Mm-hmm.
who do you think is the one that actually decided to put this whole experiment to work? Do you think it was Palpatine, Tarkin, Vader, or none of the above?
I would say none of the above.
You are incorrect. Vader actually puts this fucking practice to work.
What a dumbass, dude. Because like Tarkin's way too smart to be like, yo, we should release this shit. He's more like, no, we build super weapons. We don't make fucking horrid viruses. Palpatine's saw probably way farther in the future, like, no, this shit's gonna be a problem. We shouldn't do that. I figured he would have told Vader, yo, don't do this shit. That's stupid. I figured it had to be somebody fucking just elsewhere like, oh, this will be great. Oh my god.
So, Vader would come to learn of the existence of the sickness and laid the groundwork for the virus's recreation, ordering the Imperial Biological Weapons Division to devise a process by which the pathogen could be synthesized and enriched into a concentrated and weaponized version of the original disease.
God damn it.
This product was destined to be a method of the Empire for the Empire to eradicate revolutionaries and freedom fighters like those in the Alliance to restore the Republic. The effort was designated Imperial Bioweapons Project I-71A, but the final outcome was eventually codenamed Project Blackwing, or the Blackwing virus. The scientists of the Biological Weapons Division operated in secrecy to fulfill Vader's mandate, working on board the Imperial One-class Star Destroyer Vector as it toured the Outer Rim territories, wild space, and the unknown regions. Although biologists and weapons developers affiliated with the project were aware of the goal of their effort, the stormtroopers and officers aboard were kept uninformed about the research being performed. This research eventually reached fruition after the scientists synthesized a concentrated viral fluid in the bodies of 2 human hosts. This more concentrated variant of the sickness existed in its original gray liquid form, but also had the potential to become airborne, thereby making it more pervasive. As Biological Weapons Division team began seeing promising results, the vector was directed to the interim world of Megalim. Meglumine?
Meglamind? Oh
Almost
shit,
like
dude. The Spider, dude.
Here, a small group from the vessel traveled planetside to collect pallets of airtight tanks that could contain the fluid form of the Blackwing virus. After being taken aboard, the tanks were loaded with the liquid and were moved into storage while the vector... lost my place. The vector journeyed towards a weapons testing base on Konji 7. Outside the Brunnet system. Despite the weapons division's prior success, the process of moving the tanks proved to be problematic when several troopers mishandled the cargo and caused a number of the containers to leak. The leaking tanks released the Blackwing virus as an airborne pathogen that quickly infected the thousands of Imperials aboard the Vector. The disease initially appeared to be easily containable, as the scientists aboard the Vector succeeded in quarantining the area of the ship that had been directly exposed to the virus. This worked for a time and allowed biologists to collect sample tissues from those who had been infected and examine these within Biolab 177. During the time, the Vector's engines experienced a critical malfunction, causing the ship to periodically lose power and stall in space. Imperial engineering at its finest, ladies and gentlemen. This is what happens when you don't dry dock for more than a week.
Space mix.
While technical crews tried in vain to address the problem, the research team conducted studies on the Blackwing virus's effects on the lungs and larynx by removing those organs from the bodies of the diseased and placing them in a large fluid-filled vat in the laboratory. As they studied the waveform screams emitted by the larynx, they continued to collect viral fluid being produced within the lungs and even discovered that some aboard the vessel had a natural immunity to the disease. After learning that it was a random genetic quirk, they used the blood of the immune to create an antivirus that could prevent infection in those inoculated with it. While this was supposed to be issued to all the crew members aboard the Vector, it became apparent there would not be enough serum to go around. Problems with the engines eventually led to power failures throughout the ship, causing the Vector to lose communications and come to a complete halt in the unknown regions. Rank-and-file soldiers continued with daily activities and exercises. Members of the research team and Vector's high command had to address the issue developing within the quarantine zones. Among the most troubling developments stood the the inaccessibility of remaining antivirus, which was located in the ship's contaminated Biolab 242, as well as the resurrection of those who had been killed by the virus during the initial leak. Eventually, the plan to quarantine the infected failed, as the Blackwing virus had finally transcended the containment barriers aboard the Vector, spreading to the rest of the crew. While hundreds of troopers became sick and died, those who were inoculated against the infection enacted contingency plans to try to stave off the disease's progression through the ship and prevent the victims from transforming into the undead. I want to pause on that one for a moment. You remember how I said leave the cattle with the wolves?
Yeah.
That's basically what the fucking Star Destroyer became.
Oh, God.
To that end, the survivors rounded up the bodies of the deceased and ground them up in a garbage facility, leaving behind a massive hill of flesh, limbs, and entrails in the waste room.
Flesh limbs. Ugh.
Even this attempt was only marginally successful. Some of these remains were still possessed by the Blackwing virus, while victims who were transformed before they could be chopped up began to eat the immune and inoculated. As conditions worsened, a number of the surviving Imperial forces made plans to escape the Vector under the leadership of one Commander Gorster. 29 Imperial soldiers boarded the Sentinel-class landing craft Freebird and departed the Star Destroyer.
Freebird?
Gorster's forces did not make it far. The undead aboard the Vector had taken control of the entire Star Destroyer and learned to operate its tractor beam. Pulling the Freebird back into the hangar, the victims attempted to breach the ship's hull and access the survivors within, but found themselves unable to do so. The zombies thus resigned themselves to stalking the now derelict destroyer, while the soldiers aboard the landing craft waited for rescue for the next 10 weeks. During that time, Gorster's men were forced to resort to cannibalism for sustenance, which ultimately reduced their numbers from 30 to 7.
That's fucked.
Now we arrive at where all of this comes to a head. For 10 weeks following the leak on the Vector, the ship drifted through the unknown regions, intercepting and capturing any vessel that crossed its path. Around this time, the Imperial prison barge Purge was transporting a full load of inmates to the corrections facility on the detention moon known as Gradient 7, passing directly through a region of space occupied by the Vector. The barge became easy prey for the Star Destroyer, which caught the Purge in its tractor beam, thereby damaging the transport's engines. Those aboard the Purge, including the Imperial Corrections Service Warden Bisley Cloth and Guard Captain Jareth Sartoris, and the onboard technicians, were unaware of the reason for the engine's failure. As such, they saw the presence of the Vector as a blessing. The Star Destroyer, although apparently derelict, was certain to be carrying the necessary supplies and parts to allow the Purge's technicians to repair their drives. To collect the goods, Warden Cloth directed the Purge to connect with the Vector via an extendable docking shaft and ordered Captain Sartoris to lead a team of 9 men, consisting of Imperial Corrections Officer Austin, Vesic, and Armitage, engineers Greeley, Blandings, Thebes, and Quartermass, as well as 2 stormtroopers, were brought aboard the larger vessel. Upon entering, the 10 Imperials split into 2 teams. Now, for those who know their RPG logic, 1, don't split the party. For those who know your horror logic, don't split the team!
Alright, gang, let's split up and look for clues. Oh, that's so fucked. They're so dead. They're so dead.
Both teams independently searched for parts to repair the barge, and during the search, the men became infected with the airborne Blackwing virus, gradually becoming sicker and sicker. Sartoris' team of 5 completed their objective and returned to the docking shaft, but the other group came under attack from the undead aboard the Vector and were ultimately killed. The guard captain assumed his missing subordinates had already returned to the Purge, and so returned to the ship to rendezvous with them and begin repairs. At this point, all members of his team were experiencing rasping coughs and occasional vomiting. Because their contamination diagnostics had indicated that the Vector had not been exposed to any harmful biological agent, they believed this to be a result of subpar prison mess hall food. But their continually worsening conditions forced them all...
Yeah, don't worry, guys. It's just food poisoning. I'll be fine. As he starts bleeding from the eyes. I'm fine, dudes.
Worsening conditions forced them all into the Purge's med bay. The medical wing was overseen by Dr. Zara Cody and her 2-1B surgical droid Waste, neither of whom could identify the specific illness that was overtaking the men, nor find the appropriate measures to stem the progression of the disease. While ICOs Austin and Vesic descended into hemorrhaging and uncontrollable vomiting, Captain Sartoris remained unaffected, for he possessed the rare genetic quirk that prevented him from contracting the virus's airborne method. The same could not be said for most aboard the Purge. Upon the return of the team sent into the Vector, the disease spread uncontrollably throughout the prison barge. Troopers and corrections officers were sent to the medbay in droves to seek treatment for nausea, seizures, and other symptoms. The prisoners in Gen Pop were left to ride out the disease on their own. Despite efforts to avoid contraction through the use of quarantine bubbles and biohazard gear, the sickness continued to spread, driving its victims through waves of pain or fits of insanity. Besides Sartoris, 3 other individuals aboard the Purge were immune: Dr. Zara Cody, and inmate brothers Trig and Kale Longo. Upon realizing her natural resistance to the disease, Dr. Cody allowed Waste to take a sample of blood from her. Droid used the sample to create an antivirus, but did not succeed in doing so until nearly all of the prisoners, guards, troopers, and administrators, numbering 522 prior to exposure, had been killed.
It sucks!
Zara Cody was able to save the lives of only 2 of the convicts, the smugglers Han Solo and Chewbacca. Because we have to insert our known branding in here.
And they have to survive.
Yes. Who were being kept in solitary confinement. They were subjected to an entirely different airflow than that of the rest of the Purge, which prevented them from contracting the airborne contaminant. My, isn't that just some plot convenience? Your solitary confinement runs off a different airflow than the rest of your fucking ship. Ain't that just convenient?
That's crazy.
Dr. Cody released the 2 from imprisonment and inoculated them with the antivirus before journeying to find the rest of the survivors. She succeeded in finding the Longo brothers, but discovered that Captain Sartoris had escaped the Purge in the last accessible escape pod only moments earlier. While the survivors formulated a different plan of escape, the virus compelled all of the dead to gather in the lower levels of the Gen Pop area when the sickness's quorum sensing ability recognized the high number of undead pawns at its disposal. It reanimated the bodies, which immediately began to search for the only remaining living things on the Purge: Dr. Cody, Captain Solo, Chewbacca, and the Longo brothers. The sudden and unexpected assault from the vessel's deceased forced the survivors to journey through the docking tube that still connected the Purge to the Vector. During the attempt to flee, Kale Longo was bitten and infected by the reanimated corpse of his father, who had been killed weeks prior. All 5 of them escaped into the Star Destroyer's hangar and sealed the tube behind them. But the elder Longo brother Trig was unable to travel due to his injury. The elder Longo brother Kale was unable to travel due to his injury. Dr. Cody chose to stay in the hangar and work to treat his wound, while Trig Longo followed Solo and Chewbacca to the destroyer's bridge. where they hoped to gain control of the destroyer. During the journey, the boy and the smugglers discovered that the ship was filled with the thousands of undead crew members and stormtroopers who were roaming through the vessel in search of food. In the hangar, Dr. Cody was able to stem the progression of the disease through Kale's body. While the two rested, the undead in the docking tube utilized blasters in an effort to break through the seal. The attempts were successful, and as they shot their way into the hangar, Kale Longo was hit in the face with a blaster bolt, killing him immediately. Cody was forced to leave his body and flee, allowing the undead to fully infect and transform it. Elsewhere, Sartoris, who had managed to escape prior, had been captured by the Vector's tractor beam. Awakening in the hangar bay, having been rendered unconscious by the tumultuous entry, he was set upon by the ravenous undead, but would come to be rescued by Commander Gorister and his men, who were still hiding within the Freebird. Gorister explained the fall of the Vector to the captain, while his 6 surviving soldiers moved to kill the newcomer. Although the survivors intended to eat Sartoris for sustenance, the captain overpowered the emaciated Gorister and threw him and several of his men to the zombies waiting outside the vessel. He decided to spare 3 of the men, White, Pauling, and Tanner, but soon discovered that he had been bitten by one of the undead during the commotion. Upon realizing this, he set off to find other survivors from the Purge and deactivated the destroyer's tractor beam. Meanwhile, Cody wandered into Biolab 242, where the virus had been recreated. Within, she was nearly killed by one of the infected scientists who helped create the plague, but was saved by an Imperial medical droid. Cody later made it aboard the Freebird herself. Near the Vector's bridge, Trig Longo was separated from Solo and the Wookiee, and ultimately became prey for the newly transformed body of his brother, Kale. He escaped his attacker, but nearly fell into a horde of the undead, having deactivated the tractor beam. Sartoris commandeered one of the vessel's utility lifters and caught the boy, and picked up Solo and Chewbacca. Despite the apparent rescue, their combined weight pulled the hovercraft towards the ravenous morass. Knowing he was already in the process of transformation due to his bite, Sartoris sacrificed himself so that the others might live. The 3 met up with Pauling and Tanner at the Freebird. White had been killed earlier, and the 5 survivors eventually reached the Freebird only to find a creature had gotten aboard, killed Pauling and Tanner. Cody killed the creature, and the 4 escaped as they fled the Vector. They witnessed other dock ships take off, piloted by the undead with the intent to spread the sickness. These ships ultimately failed to make it to hyperspace, as their zombie pilots lost their faculties after distancing themselves from an atmosphere that provided continuous exposure to the virus. And that is why the method of actually vacuum sealing those fuckers works.
So they have to have constant exposure to the virus to function?
They have to have a constant exposure to an infected atmosphere. Or an infectable atmosphere. Or any atmosphere from the sound of it.
Okay.
The virus has to have an atmosphere in order to work. Because without it, the entire body's faculty will just shut down.
Okay.
The virus will die without any lack of available oxygen. So ultimately, they do need oxygen to live. They need a form of breathable air, a form of contained atmosphere. They cannot exist within a vacuum. So that is one surefire way of actually purging the disease. Is just straight up like kill life support. Shut down all life support capability. Boom, dead.
I mean, cool. Now, if you bring it back afterwards, does it get reinfected?
I would imagine that infected bodies probably will reanimate, but so long as life support is disabled and you've got enough oxygen and enough fire, You can actually probably kill off that you can probably, like, safely keep yourself from getting infected.
Okay.
You probably have a higher chance of surviving that. So, sealing off a atmospheric exposure works. Killing a contained airspace, essentially. That's all it needs to survive. You can't stop it by blocking its existing airspace, but so long as it lacks a breathable airspace, dead. You can kill the virus, but you can eliminate the virus just by doing that.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, that is the Death Troopers. That is the basic plot run of the Death Troopers. Now on to our final piece, the Dathomir Quarantine. After the Vector incident, the Blackwing Project was relocated to a secret Imperial research and prison facility on the remote planet Dathomir. The Empire recruited high-profile scientists from all around the galaxy to participate in the project. Dr. Griffax Jin served as chief virologist, and other scientists include Drs. Pram Ramongo, Stain Triton, Nomi Rain, Pyodis Ray, Tersal, and Xeris Ends. In 1 ABY, an accident happened in the Imperial Research and Prison Facility, and the virus escaped containment yet again.
Of course it.
Not only
this shit's like the flood. Like, it's all contained, and then someone fucks something up, and then it's a galaxy problem.
You know, that's actually not far off in comparison. Comparing Blackwing to the Flood is actually not far off, given that it works off a hive mind.
Yeah, shit's crazy.
That's not entirely a wrong comparison, now that I'm thinking about it. I don't think I ever really considered that. That's a first, huh?
And you have to wait for it to congeal enough bodies together to make a grave
And
mind.
the only difference is the Flood can obviously survive through space. The Blackwing virus does not have that luxury, as it needs a breathable atmosphere. But once again, it broke out, killed most of the people in the area, turning them into zombies, and even got a hold of some of the local witches. Some of the local tribes of Dathomir witches also became infected with this same plague.
Uh-oh.
Now, normally you would think that, just like they did when they tried to keep the witches from leaving the damn planet, that the Empire would resolve this by blasting the piss out of it.
You would think.
Nope. The Empire promptly established a quarantine zone to contain the infection. A few people who survived the initial virus outbreak, mostly Imperial staff and prisoners, were trapped in the quarantine zone. Establishing 5 camps within the area, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, and Epsilon, trying to live in safety while waiting for an evacuation. Camps all came under regular attack from the zombies. Moreover, all rescue teams were attacked upon landing in the area, and their members were killed before they could find the survivors. Landing in the zone was eventually prohibited, and Imperial authorities only tried to support the survivors with supply airdrop. There's your Star Wars 7 days, motherfuckers. Turning to aid in this plight, Dr. Zara Cody and Trig Longo, the survivors from the Purge, soon arrived on Dathomir and were dropped into Camp Alpha from the Millennium Falcon by Solo and Chewbacca. Cody and Longo had decided to distribute to the survivors of the quarantine zone an antivirus developed by Cody during the Vector incident. Darth Vader was not eager to lose the virus and the research data. The Dark Lord dispatched Captain Piet to recruit volunteers in order to enter the quarantine zone and obtain an original sample of the Blackwing virus in the research center. In the meantime, both the Rebel Alliance and the Black Sun managed to steal Imperial authorization for the quarantine zone, and Han Solo and Guri sent their own agents to find the virus before the Empire. The Spacers ventured into the quarantine zone, where they had to find a number of undead, and they eventually reached the research and prison facility, where they were attacked by the most aggressive undead creatures, even coming into facing a giant undead rancor.
Awful.
They're
already hard to kill. Now you made one a zombie.
The Blackwing crystals found in the undead rancor's cave were possibly an unknown byproduct of the Blackwing virus they were aptly named after. The Spacers finally found Dr. Griffax Jin, the Imperial Chief Virologist who had survived the outbreak. However, the man soon turned into a zombie and attacked the Spacers. After the scientist was definitely killed...
Dude, this is just the guy from... what the fuck is his name? The horrible scientist doctor guy from Resident Evil 1?
Yeah.
2.
I think you were right. I think it's 1.
No, it's 2, because it's the one with Claire in it. It's Claire and Leon.
Yeah, 2 is Claire and Leon.
Yeah, it's 2, because it's the horrible scientist doctor that also turns into a zombie and leaves his daughter. The fuck is his name? Birkin! It's just Dr. Birkin.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
After the scientist was definitely killed, the Spacers got a sample of the virus in the lab, and they would also encounter some survivors, including Dr. Pram Dramongo, Dr. Stain Triton, and Dr. Nomi Rain, and eventually helped them all to leave the research facility alive. During this same outbreak on Dathomir, a number of witches of Dathomir became infected with the disease, and in an attempt to contain the outbreak, the Empire tried to kill off most of the Howling Crag Night Sister clan. However, 3 of the infected witches, Denkra, Nyja, and Thestrial Chimeri, survived using spells to fight off the contagion. These 3 sisters would come to earn the title of Sisters of the Void, and develop the ability to reanimate the corpses of dead witches and slaves, controlling them in battle.
It's fucking...
That is the story, the history, and the explanation of Star Wars' most fucked up creation, the Blackwing virus.
Yeah, Blackwing virus is fucked.
That's fucked.
It's bad. It's bad out here.
So, the history conveniently... Well, I got to explain the actual virus itself. The fun of the talking over the history was the way it's sectioned out actually covers the proper narrative events for each of its 3 pieces of main media. Red Harvest being the opening, Death Troopers being the actual middle ground and its first main appearance, and the Star Wars Galaxy's adventure on Dathomir.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the main things those are all the main instances where those came and made an appearance in. Those are also the only appearances where it made an appearance. Those are the only 3 instances where it ever made any existing relevance were the Red Harvest novel, the Death Troopers novel, and the Star Wars Galaxy Adventure on Dathomir.
Okay.
Getting to run the theme park and the dungeon on Dathomir is how you get to know that whole story.
I have to do that now.
I mean, it's Halloween. It's considering that was the actual like Halloween release thing. Like that was their big Halloween adventure thing. Like that was what Galaxies did. Is they're like, oh well, Death Troopers starting to take a turn. We've got a way to kind of implement that in a way, I guess. So how about zombies? Wanna go have a boss fight with an undead rancor?
It sounds awful.
I mean, I'm gonna share the picture of it real quick. I'm gonna share the picture of it to you. This is the actual picture from the cutscene, from a cutscene, I think, in the game. Or it's like a snapshot of it. Like, this thing is actively being summoned by a bunch of undead witches.
I don't like that thing.
Yeah, that's the undead rancor.
I don't like that thing at all.
I bet that makes you feel even worse considering you play a creature handler.
I was about to say, I don't like it. I do want it, though.
I am disgusted by this thing's appearance, but it makes me want it all the more. Because it's...
I don't like the backstory, but it's neat. I want it.
Yeah, I don't think you can actually claim it, is the unfortunate thing, but
I
guess that
sucks.
I guess that kind of makes sense.
You can't really tame a zombie.
Yeah. The Empire tried. That's literally what the Blackwing virus ended up being. Of course, it was also supposed to work as a method of, like, grand scale suppression on dissidents. So, you know. This is why bioweapons don't work, gentlemen.
I mean, they work too well. That's the problem.
Yeah. They work
way too well.
They work better than the scope of its creator, and that's the problem. They progress faster than even the creator can predict, and that's the problem in line with biological weapons. But yeah, no, this is fucked. Everything about this is absolutely screwed up. I apologize I couldn't bring my own little flavor to this, but I felt like I needed to just read this more directly from the wiki and spoof read more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it came to the actual details of the virus itself. This thing is fucked.
Yeah, it's not great.
Like, and like I said before, the narratives to these, the actual, like, the actual Death Troopers novel is easily a more, like, this is supposed to be a zombie horror story. But Red Harvest just kind of cranked that up to 11 on its horror scale. If I actually had to give a note which one is scarier by sheer just unsettling scene play, it goes to Red Harvest.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, like, messed up stuff that goes on in the Red Harvest novel. And, like, the whole scene I mentioned earlier, like, you expect, like, characters to be... You expect, like, cruelty with the acolytes and whatever. They're gonna fight each other. They're gonna beat each other up. You don't expect that kind of fucking fucked up shit from Sith.
Yeah.
Like, Sith are that... Sith evil basically culminates to... I'm going to prove that I'm strong, and I'm gonna beat your ass doing it. I'm gonna prove that I'm strong and I'm gonna beat your ass doing it. Or I'm gonna try to prove that I'm stronger than you by fucking mouthing off for several fucking scenes. And when the fucking battle actually comes out, I'm gonna get absolutely fucking bodied.
Yep.
That's the dichotomy of Sith. Not whatever happens here. This is fucked.
Yeah, this isn't great.
Whatever happens in that novel, it's messed up.
I'm gonna have to list.
If I ever go through finishing the novel, because I'll be honest, when it started getting the later chapters, it really hit a crawl. Like, the problem with Red Harvest is it's a crawl to finally get to the, like, interesting stuff. I was about to say juicy bits, but I don't think we want those.
I don't want to think about Red Harvest and juice, thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of fucked up. Like, Star Wars is, at the very minimum, capable of achieving various types of genres, and they can do them well. But there's instances where that separate flavor almost gets cranked up to an extreme. Because Death Troopers obviously is like, here's Star Wars horror. And then Red Harvest is, here's Star Wars horror multiplied by cancer.
Oh yeah. It's bad.
It's messed up. They're all really good stories, I'll give them that. Like I said, the problem with Red Harvest really is that it's just such a slow crawl. Death Troopers takes no hesitation in getting to some of the spooky stuff, because by chapter 6, you're already getting the notes of creep factor. Like, the vibe has already set in by 5. It's 6 when chapter 6 is when it actually takes itself up and finally becomes what its name is. Here's your Star Wars horror.
Yup. That woof. Woof.
Because, like I said, the actual thing about the Empire experimenting on the lungs and whatever. So there's actually a scene there's actually a part of the later chapters of the early chapters of the Death Trooper novel. When they're going through and exploring the Vector, one of the troops from Kloss unit, because Kloss unit just fucking splits the fuck off. Sartorius keeps his unit pretty uniform, and they get back to the ship. Their story isn't covered, but obviously they all end up infected anyway, and that's how it spreads through. But Kloss unit just... That man let his men die. Like, that dude had no fucking ability to competently keep his men safe. They were fucked the second they walked in that door and decided, we're gonna split up. Because not only did the two teams split up, Kloss unit went all over the place. Because one of them ends up in that same laboratory where I was mentioning, like, the vats of the human lungs and everything in the laboratory on display. Like, they're in those the liquid-filled vats, and it's just the sight of these, like, human lungs and larynx pulled out and sitting floating in these vats. During that scene, and if you actually listen to the audiobook for it, all of a sudden, like, while he's walking through investigating, that fucking scream will get you. All of the lungs in that lab start screaming, and it's not something you're gonna be prepared for. Like, the audiobook, I think the audiobooks do a much better job setting the tones than just reading the books. It's messed up. But the Death Troopers one is good if you like if you like horror stories, check out. If you like horror stories, if you like Star Wars, check those out. If you like zombie stories especially, check those out. And if you have access to any of the fucking emulation ports for Star Wars Galaxies, go to Dathomir and see how fucked that gets. Once you actually get access to it, because unfortunately there is a access cap, I believe, that you have to get if you're if you're the Empire, you have to earn an access point. You're the Rebels or the Freelance, you have to fucking get a method of transportation there from them.
Yep.
And I think
I went around trying to explore all the planets, and it was like, you're not allowed to go here. And I went, oh, okay.
Yeah,
I guess
that's something that that's something that a lot of them do. And it's kind of problem with Galaxies more than anything. It's just how they keep people from ending up in places they're not supposed to, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, the things in here will absolutely push your shit in if you aren't X level. You don't have an X number of fucking skill point. You're gonna absolutely fucking die. But yeah, no, that's our finale for the Halloween segment. But our Dathomir saga does continue, and like I mentioned in the prior bit, these last two parts of the Dathomir saga will contain two separate character stories. Would you like to take a crack at who our first character narrative is?
Sure. Related to Dathomir.
Related to Dathomir.
I'm going to assume it is. Do they? Well, that doesn't. Never mind. Is it Maul?
Maul is on the docket, but our next one is Ventress.
That was my next guess too. Fuck. I was like, it's either going to be Maul or his brother or Ventress. Shit.
So Savage does not have the level of lore to be able to cover his own piece, but he will be covered as part of Maul's story when we cover him after Ventress.
Okay.
And I feel like it's more appropriate to cover Ventress because of how her story kind of brings Maul back into the fold of everything.
Cool.
So we'll talk about Ventress and her story, and then we'll get into talking about Maul and his whole legacy. So we're gonna knock out two major characters in big Star Wars lore back to back. I just now realized that these are like first two, like, here's major characters for Star Wars. Like, Maul and Ventress are pretty big names as far as like the animated series and the movies go. Mainline Star Wars content, those two are top of the board. Those are in the top 20 or in the top 10, top 20 at minimum. I think Ventress and Maul sit pretty high in everyone's top 10 just because of their stories through the Clone Wars more than anything.
Yeah.
Maul especially, given all the stuff he does throughout Rebels. And in between. So we'll have a fair bit to talk about between both of them, but that'll be next week. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy. Stream schedule will actually be back up and running starting next week as well. I'm gonna do my Holloway spooky segment, and I'm gonna get Cole and Beans together, and we're gonna play Pilgrim for our Tuesday horror game, or Tuesday gaming horror game. Wednesday, I'm gonna try to get back to Sparking Zero and continuing Gohan's legacy. Well, starting Gohan's story. We're gonna do more of the story mode stuff, and Gohan's next on the docket because we finished Vegeta. So we got that, and then the Hut playthrough will also pick up again because I'm gonna try to get that close to finishing before the. I'll try to get that as close to finishing as I can before the eventual 3.5 update for Thrawn's Revenge comes out later this year, maybe, or probably sometime next year. I think it's gonna be next year when that one. I think next year is when the 3.5 for that comes out, because I think the big opening for the 0.5 releases is going to be the upcoming Revan's Revenge, which I will do a playthrough of. I'm thinking of doing either the Mandalorians or the Sith for that first playthrough. Because the opening factions to play, you'll get the Republic, the Sith, and the Mandalorians. And I'm thinking the Mandalorians.
Dude. Yeah, start Mandalorians.
Thinking Mandalorians, because they've got a lot of fun stuff, especially for ground roster. Their ground roster looks really cool, and they've got a real interesting load of ships to play with, and there's
start Mandalorian and just fucking main Basilisk war droids.
Oh, those are actually the fighter craft that they get.
That's their fighters. That's insane.
That's their fighters. That's their fighters. Yeah.
Oh man, get fucked, everybody else.
Good luck, everybody else.
Oh, that's insane.
Yeah, they absolutely go through that mess, and that I'm excited for when that one releases. It probably will not be before the Hut probably will be before the Hut playthrough finishes. So if that happens, what'll likely happen is I'll get to a point within the Hut playthrough. I'll say this. If I reach the 20 BBY mark, if I get to a point where the campaign finishes by 20 BBY and Kessel doesn't open up for me, then I'll go off and do the Revan's Revenge playthrough. That's my goal. I will end the campaign when Kessel becomes available to me, and I get to conquer
dude.
it.
Conquer Kessel, you win the game. That's it. You won.
That's my new ending cap for the Hut playthrough, because given that the 3.5 update will probably come out sometime next year, and Revan's Revenge is, from the looks of it, right around the corner. We're probably looking at mid to late December, early January would probably be projected release frame, considering the beta is supposed to start in the next couple weeks, and those usually last like a month and a half. So probably sometime January, if not late December. Let's see what release frames look like, and if it comes out sometime before, we'll probably I'll start up a Mandalorian playthrough. If I can take Kessel before the Revan's Revenge mod drops, that'll be my landmark. Try to take Kessel before the end of production on Revan's Revenge. When that releases, boom, we end the playthrough for the Huts there, and we will jump into Revan's Revenge and do a Mando playthrough, I think. I'll probably do Mando and Sith. I don't think I'll do the Republic until all their stuff gets flushed out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wait, because this is just gonna be like the barest bones thing. Like, this is releasing as like, here's all of our core aspect stuff, and in the next release, in the next two releases, we're gonna provide the whole swath of fun stuff. Because they've also talked about putting a super early start during the Tales of the Jedi comics, like the old school Dark Horse Tales of the Jedi comics.
Cool.
But they've also talked about putting it with a completely different campaign scale into the MMO Star Wars The Old Republic's time frame. Because right now, the current timeline exists, everything from the start of the Mandalorian's galactic conquest all the way up to the end of KOTOR 2 is where the era standard kind of comes and goes.
Okay.
That'll be what the opening for it will have, and eventually they're going to do all the way up to well before any of that with the Tales of the Jedi comic, setting in the first conflicts with the Jedi and the Sith, and then all the way onward with an entirely separate campaign frame, which I assume they'll actually do for the Legacy era, if they ever add that for Thrawn's Revenge. I imagine the Legacy era or like post-Vong period will probably go into that same vein.
Yeah. And
it'll go all the way onward to when the MMO's events kind of transpire. Because while the latter part is speculative at best, because they're not really sold on if they're not sold on if they are willing to push it that far. But I think it would be dope. And there's a lot of fun stuff they can do with that whole area. The whole area of Star Wars. Much like Disney. Take notes. I'm sorry. I will keep begging for an Old Republic series.
Yep. And when you get it, it'll be bad.
It will. And I will be disappointed.
It'll just be bad.
If they flub an Old Republic series, I will end every fucking thing I have for Disney. Like, Disney will officially lose any good faith I'm still clinging on to with the needle thread that still latches there.
That's unfortunate, dude. Just cut that thread, dude. Cut that string.
No, because if they
fall down here with me.
No.
Jump off that tightrope.
No. We'll see you all over the course of next week. Hope you all have a good weekend. This has been the Freelancer and Jake signing off for now. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.